Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Bruch, and this afternoon I'm going to be speaking to you about third-party risk management post-pandemic. A little bit of background about myself first. I have been in the IT and cybersecurity and risk management field for over 20 years. I'm currently serving as the officer in charge of third-party cybersecurity assurance for national IT within the Federal Reserve. National IT's got some responsibility for internally facing systems and services and networks in support of internal Federal Reserve business operations. But I'm not really coming to you today in that capacity, right? I'm just a third-party risk professional. Be sharing some personal views and thoughts on the topic. I've got our customary disclaimer kind of to read here. That any representation statements, really reflecting my own personal views and opinions, not necessarily views and opinions of the Federal Reserve. I would like to thank Nancy for the opportunity to share these thoughts today, on third-party risk. Now that we're in the midst of this global pandemic. So an outline for today, I did want to level set a little bit on third-party risk. What is it that I'm talking about when we say third-party risk? Talk a little bit about third-party risk management at a high level, just for the third-party risk professionals in the room. Level set on some changes we're seeing from COVID to kind of set the stage then for our risk management focus, in response. I've kind of grouped activities that we might want to take into three different categories here, and resilience, cybersecurity, and then the third parties themselves, their pandemic response. What have they been doing in response? So let's kick it off with some typical third-party risk categories. As we've got such a large number of risk categories within third party, and there's a lot of interrelationships between them. I'm not going to read all of these different ones, but some big ones are strategic and financial and reputational risks, and a lot of these other ones fall into operational risk categories. Right in the middle here, you'll notice I'm calling out fourth parties, fifth parties, subcontractors. A lot of these risks might also apply to those. You'll notice that pandemic risk is not a risk category. So it's not something specifically managed against when it comes to third-party risk. That said, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a pandemic response plan. We shouldn't, have, we shouldn't not have a pandemic response plan. What I recommend is that we actually include some third-party considerations within pandemic response plans, and some of those considerations could come from things that we talk about today. One thing about a pandemic is it does highlight the importance of a number of these different risk categories, such as business continuity and cybersecurity, financial risk, execution risk, and fourth-party risk. So third-party risk management activities typically take place within this third-party lifecycle. So I wanted to touch base on this third-party lifecycle so that we understand, when these activities are happening. So typical third-party lifecycle, an outsourcing decision is made, and then we've got a due diligence step. If you think about procurement processes and RFPs and things like that, we're developing functional and non-functional requirements. We're asking vendors how they can meet those requirements, and we're also doing, cybersecurity due diligence with questionnaires and collecting evidence and things like that to make sure that our third parties are secure. We go into contract negotiations, and then we sign contracts, we implement services, and we have ongoing monitoring. A lot of risk management activities and ongoing monitoring. Somewhere in this process, most organizations having limited resources can't do everything for all vendors. So there's typically some sort of a risk management tiering process that occurs, multiple tiers. Inherent risk profiling might be something that your organization does to try to identify the most risky vendors. And of course, if you have limited resources, you want to take that risk-based approach where you're doing more activities for the more riskier third-party relationships. Another thing with ongoing monitoring, you're going to have periodic activities that you do, again, driven by tiers, but you're also going to have triggering events that may get you doing some additional third-party risk management activities. And a pandemic is certainly a triggering event, right? So what do we do with a triggering event like a pandemic? That's sort of the question. Well, what has changed, right? What's happened because of the pandemic, right? You can see the World Economic Forum here is really, highlighting that no one is really fully prepared to handle a pandemic, right? The statement is from their annual global risk report that they put out. So there are going to be impacts, right? There are going to be unforeseen events and reactions to those events that are occurring. The biggest thing that everybody can, probably relate to in one way or another is this increase in working from home. Gartner, surveys and other surveys, and in fact, they're all sort of indicating that even after the pandemic is over, just the increase in work from home is going to be more permanent. We're going to see more people working from home than before the pandemic. If you think about what happened, with working from home, it's really a massive change in process, right? Just a couple examples, right? Data now being accessed from home. Are there new work from home data requirements that were put in place or not? Physical security in your workplaces, right? Brand new considerations that have to be taken into account. Supply chain, certainly gaps in visibility have appeared. A lot of times it's coming through in delays, right? In delivery of products and services, and perhaps it's your actual third parties are experiencing their own delay in delivery from their third parties and their fourth parties. Perhaps we've discovered a bit of an overdependence on specific vendors, right? Maybe one vendor service kind of being delayed and going away is impacting more of your business areas than you had imagined or realized. Perhaps there's an overdependence on certain geographic areas that you just didn't realize. When you study supply chains of a lot of these vendors, you don't go too many tiers deep in their supply chain before everything it seems to be going back into China in some way. And we know we've seen China, basically parts of China shut their doors for a while, sort of impacting the inflow of goods and services, and it's just been a huge impact. Another thing to be aware of is bankruptcies, right? We have seen companies that have closed their doors, right? Declared bankruptcy. And what happens to your data when suddenly you realize that no one's returning your emails, they're not answering their phone? What do? A lot of technology changes, right? I've seen a lot of studies that talk about the increase in procurement of SaaS solutions versus buying, on-prem type software and and installing things in data centers and things like that, or opting for software as a service instead. Big increase in reliance on collaboration software. Just look at today, WebEx, right, for what would have been an in-person conference. A lot of support for remote workers, right? Upgrading infrastructure to support increased bandwidth, right, to allow everybody to work from home. Perhaps new VPNs and things like that would have been purchased. And a lot of times, there's a need to get these things deployed rapidly, right? So when things get deployed rapidly, might not be following normal processes, got some shortcuts, maybe introducing some risks into your environment. And finally, just fraud and cybersecurity crime has really increased. FBI, you go out there and take a look at their coronavirus page, and they're identified over 150 new fraud schemes, right? Just over the past few months, right? And you think about just the bad actors out there. They've got some great topics, right, to help entice us to click on things we don't want to click on: economic stimulus, loan relief, vaccine developments, things like that. Very, very, very interesting topics for all of us that are just worried about the state of things. So let's look at some things now that we can do in response. Again, I've got them grouped into three categories: resilience, cybersecurity, and then third-party pandemic response. First one, I want to place an increased emphasis on resilience. What can we do to prepare for this? I think we want to take a look at a fresh look at our business processes. Certainly want to identify and sort of reconfirm those external services that we're calling critical, right? Were there new services that were procured, right, to help better support the mission and the changing environment? And again, resilience on certain services, external services, has it changed? Just one example, is video conferencing, for example. I mean, a year ago compared to today, how dependent is business on these external video conferencing services like Zoom and Google Hangouts or WebEx or Teams and things like that. A year ago, stuff like that might not have been in that top tier for vendor risk management. Maybe it maybe it is today, right? Just because of the dependence that's there. So second, I would recommend taking a look at the actual third-party risk management program. I mentioned tiering. I mentioned inherent risk profilings to help drive the amount of activity, risk management activity that you want to perform on any given vendor or third party. So, in light of all that's happened, are you happy with the criteria kind of laid out for selecting your tiers? Do you want to make any adjustments to risk profiling, right? Maybe you didn't have enough of an emphasis on financial health, right, of your companies. Do we see trends going up or down in the financial health? Declining financial health. Maybe we want to act in different ways today than we would have a year ago. So, moving on to assess and respond. For business continuity plans, we definitely want to look at those and ensure there's proper coverage for third-party service reliance. We want to be taking a look at what happens during delays, right, or outages completely from these third parties. And I would encourage you to take a look at what an outage means, what a long-term outage means. We have been operating kind of in degraded or different modes for 7+ months now. So take a look at continuity plans and see if they have those very long-term contingency approaches figured out. We'll say, just according to Business Insider, just some of the research I've been doing, more than half of these business closures we've seen due to Corona are pretty much expected to be permanent, right? So, Plan B vendors, contingent vendors, especially for more critical services, are all things that should be part of your plan. Confirming, updating, or creating contingency plans for vendors, especially your top tier vendors. It's time to figure out how to replace a vendor and get it integrated into your business processes. You want to be doing that beforehand versus when you're in the middle of it. Do you have pre-considerations, kind of figured out in the case of a merger, an acquisition, or a closure? And do you have, do you now understand like geographic risk and having diverse geographic locations? It's a common approach to help reduce risk. Make sure you have multiple services or multiple locations capable of delivering on common services. But the question is has geographic diversity changed now, right? Before, having geographically dispersed services, maybe on other ends of the state might have been acceptable. But now, looking at how states have been reacting to COVID and having different regulations and rules in place around closures and being able to, work to open and be on site and things like that, maybe opposite ends of the country or different states or something like that you want to make sort of a prerequisite for geographic diversity. So finally here, I encourage you to take a look at your risk management plan, revisit your business continuity plans, identify those critical services. You want to revisit tiering decisions, right? Make sure we've got services in the right tiers and we're doing the right activities again. Like, the example I used was, video conferencing, is that kind of moved up in importance. So moving on to cybersecurity. Here we're talking about confidentiality, integrity, availability, and what's the impact should one of these be compromised. First thing you really want to do here is identify what is or will change in your environment. We've already mentioned some of these. Working from home. Some people are working from home for the first time. Some businesses have allowed working from home at all for the first time, right? So it's new to employees. It could be new to the IT staff who have to come up with technology solutions to support it. This could mean, rapid deployments of technology, as I mentioned, to support remote workers, rapid procurements to support new business processes, just tons of new business process or changing processes to come about from helping to meet the work from home movement. Security and process exceptions. A lot of mature processes will have exception processes. I'm talking about the rapid deployments and perhaps potential shortcuts that we're taking in order to more quickly respond to business needs. A lot of times, these little shortcuts are supposed to be short-term risk acceptances. They find their way into exception processes. We really want to make sure that what's supposed to be a temporary risk acceptance doesn't turn into a long-term or a permanent type of risk acceptance. So you can look at what's changed, start looking at the exceptions or maybe processes that don't have exception processes that seem questionable and maybe should. You want to prioritize sort of an action plan on how you want to assess and respond to things. Now, at this point, I should probably mention, maybe some of you may have a question, that everything I'm talking about really appears kind of inwardly looking, right? Like I'm talking about your work from home posture and your changing technology environment and things like that. So what does this have to do with third parties, right? Maybe kind of a question that you have, and I promise I'm going to answer that in just a moment. So let's look at assessing and responding. So a couple common ones, like most people, most organizations, I should say, are experiencing work from home and new and expanded technology use. So what are some of the things that you should be doing there to assess the situation, see if things are still within acceptable risk parameters? So working from home, some questions you might want to ask, what new rules have been created for accessing data from remote locations, right? Typically you're thinking about your data being accessed on premise, and now the whole environment has expanded into hundreds or potentially thousands of new locations that they're being accessed from. Were controls, were cybersecurity controls able to be extended effectively into these new environments? Think about patching, for example, our endpoint devices, laptops, and things like that. Are they still able to be patched? Monitoring that potentially ties into something like a SOC or a security operations center that monitors and alerts on potential badness. Incident response. What are incident response and forensic capabilities looking like on the endpoints? All of these capabilities could very easily be degraded from when they were on-prem if it's not taken into consideration and planned for and implemented. Printers is another big one, right? A lot of people probably brought printers home. Again, what rules exist for actually printing out confidential information? And they've got printers, but what about safes? What about shredders to destroy, this information, the printed information when it's no longer needed? In my mind, I picture the coffee table in the corner with, a stack of confidential papers sitting on it, and that's something we certainly want to avoid. So new and expanding technology use. Here we're talking about rapid deployments. Rapid procurements. We'll start with that one. I talked about that due diligence step in the procurement lifecycle. Normally, that can take months at times, many weeks to many months, and in some cases, procurement activities have really needed to be accelerated to meet business needs in order to keep the doors open and services flowing. So again, were there abbreviated due diligence steps that have happened, kind of introducing new risks. The contract negotiation step, I mean, did all the normal terms and conditions, make it into these contracts that you would normally have, or were there, again, some shortcuts taken? In the rapid deployment of technology, usually there's some sort of design and review and testing and vetting processes that occurred. Were all of those able to be accomplished, or again, were there some shortcuts taken? Do we know that there's secure configurations and everything in place for those new technologies? And again, even in the internal, perhaps VPNs and other sort of internal upgrades that you made, have they been able to be fully integrated into your security operations center for monitoring, alerting, and response? And finally, policies, right? I wonder if there's any new video conferencing policies that any of you have seen in the past 6 months, right? Probably. How about home wireless network guidance, things like that. Now, there's a number of new policies or guidance documents that should be making their way into your environment to help make sure everyone is staying secure and we're not taking on any more risk than we'd like. I do have a reference slide in here. It's a link to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA agency. It's got some good guidance out there on telework, VPN-related guidance, video conferencing, as well as wireless technology guidance on how to secure those things. So this brings me to really our final slide here. And that's the third party's pandemic response, right? So I spend all this time talking about resilience and cybersecurity, your resilience and your cybersecurity, and how you've been, as an organization, been responding to these things. Well, I mean, consider all of your changes, right, to business operations since February. Consider all of the implications that we've been talking about working from home and rapid deployments of technology. And now consider that your third parties and their third parties and so on, they have all had similar impacts to their organizations, right? So what have they been doing, right, to make sure that they are still secure and operating within, acceptable risk? So to prepare here, if you don't have a third-party inventory, I highly recommend you get one. I would confirm, expand, or again, create that third-party inventory. You want to make sure that it's got actionable information in there to help you respond to situations like this. It should be identifying what external services are critical, what internal business units are really depending or relying upon those services, what data, what type of data and how much data do the vendors actually have, and what fourth and fifth parties are they potentially relying on and might also have your data? What fourth parties and fifth parties does your third party find mission essential to them that you also may be relying on and not know it? So I'd use that inventory sort of as a basis to prioritize actually going out and talking to vendors, right? Resilience and cybersecurity, you're going to be asking, many of these same questions, right? Have they reevaluated their ability to execute on their contractual obligations to you, right? Can they meet their SLAs? Have they reevaluated their dependence on their third parties to deliver? Have they reevaluated their third-party contingency plans? Do they have Plan B? Things like that. When it comes to cybersecurity, can they identify all that's changed in their environment and discuss how their cybersecurity posture has been affected? they've probably moved from work for home posture. What have they done to evaluate those situations? Is your data now the data that we're talking about when it's being, sitting on that coffee table on a printout? Have they rapidly deployed technologies? Do they have degraded, control capabilities now in monitoring and alerting and responding to cybersecurity incidents? So really, here there are certain security obligations that they've agreed to in their contract, and really this is just about making sure that they're still delivering on those and that their posture remains, their cybersecurity posture remains effective. Financial health, understanding the third party's financial health has never been more important. How is their financial position changing? Are there negative trends? Again, negative trends in market equity and cash flows, reserves, things like that. You definitely want to be talking, to understand if they are in serious trouble or not. And really, if it's looking like they can't continue to deliver on their commitments, then you need to be activating your contingency plans. And finally, just fourth parties and fifth parties, sixth parties. You're especially interested in their mission, essential services. What services are these fourth and fifth parties providing that you are really reliant on? And you want to make sure that your third party is doing to them as you are now doing to your third party is doing to their fourth party as you are now doing to your third party. Right? You want to make sure that your third party has their own effective third-party risk management program and that they're proactively reaching out to their third parties and making sure that they can continue to deliver on their commitments. So that's about it. There's so much more on this topic. I had about 35 minutes, and I think I'm at the 30-minute mark. So in conclusion, again, I don't see the pandemic becoming a new third-party risk category. I do recommend having a pandemic response plan and integrating third-party considerations into it. It's definitely worth revisiting your third-party risk program and your tiering and profiling, making sure you've got all the vendors in the right tiers, in response to this pandemic, and that you actually have the right activities that you're performing for those different tiers. Pandemic definitely emphasizes the importance, right, in thoroughness of considering certain third-party risk categories like business continuity, like cybersecurity, and like your supplier, your supply chain, and your suppliers, fourth, fifth, sixth parties, et cetera. So with that, I think we have just a few minutes for questions.